I think Tom Cruise has just arrived again. I think he went round the back and came back.
Sometimes you gotta dig deep in you and find the strength when nobody else is out there to help you. That's what this film is about.
In 2005, terrorist attacks on the London Underground concerned the world, and Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans and the southern Gulf states. Women reached new milestones in politics with the election of Angela Merkel as Germany's chancellor, while Condoleezza Rice served as the U.S. Secretary of State. As George W. Bush began his hotly contested second term, Hollywood also felt a sense of déjà vu, with franchises like Star Wars, Harry Potter, and the Chronicles of Narnia dominating the box office.
You just gotta think, how do you think you would react to a real lion?
Award season was full of upsets, however, as Crash made a surprising late surge to upset the likes of Brokeback Mountain and Munich.
I mean, shocked. We're still trying to figure out if we actually got this.
And Canada's David Cronenberg scored with the small-town thriller A History of Violence, while Adam Egoyan unveiled a mid-century murder mystery in Where the Truth Lies.
2005 was a big year for graphic novel adaptations, and really Batman Begins was the biggest of them. This is Frank Miller's Batman. This is the Batman from Arkham Asylum. This is the Batman from Batman Year One. This is really the brooding and noir Batman that we were missing.
The Joel Schumacher films of the late 90s had pretty much been the final nail in the coffin for the franchise. It was just too comical and too silly, and it was unclear whether audiences could take the character of Batman seriously again.
Christopher Nolan wanted to make a Batman movie that wasn't the Joel Schumacher Batmans or the Tim Burton Batmans. He was going to see what would happen if you had a superhero who could only use existing real-world technology. His whole thing was it has to be able to work in the real world.
The appeal that Batman has always had over a long period of time is that he seems to be an attainable concept for a lot of people, that people could become Batman, unlike someone like Superman or Spider-Man, which requires some supernatural element.
We discover how this guy, Bruce Wayne, ends up dressing up in a weird black costume, climbing over rooftops looking for bad guys. This film actually explains in the most winning way how that is psychologically possible, why someone would do that.
He's not totally great at everything yet. He's still figuring out his code, but you have Christian Bale actually nailing that. Like the cocky uncertainty of Bruce Wayne, because no one's ever said no to him. Of course he's gonna dress up as a bat and fight crime because he wants to, and he's rich and he can afford it.
When it came time for Nolan to choose a villain, he really wanted to use one that had never been depicted on film before. The Scarecrow, played by Cillian Murphy in this film, is very, very scary. This is not a PG Batman. This is a terrifying Batman.
Oh, having trouble. Take a seat, have a drink. You look like a man who takes himself too seriously.
Because Batman Begins was successful, it kind of announced a new era of superhero movies. We now expect superhero movies to take place in our reality, and it started with Batman Begins.
Sin City doesn't get enough credit for kind of revolutionizing this kind of green screen narrative thing, right? Like, I mean, everyone talks about 300 because 300 was the big kind of blockbuster that really, Hollywood was then rushing to emulate, but it really began with Sin City.
Sin City is still absolutely gorgeous to look at. Robert Rodriguez really went out of his way to make sure that it wasn't an adaptation of Frank Miller's graphic novel series, it was a direct translation. And so what that actually means is that you are seeing panel for panel shots of the world that Frank Miller created. This became a big point of contention for the Directors Guild because Robert Rodriguez really wanted to make this a co-direction situation with Frank Miller because Frank Miller really created the whole world. He created the look of it with his graphic novels. And the DGA made it very clear that they don't really do co-director credits. And so Robert Rodriguez said, okay, great, then I relinquish my, my standing with the Guild. And he left and he produces things independently, which is really ballsy to do in Hollywood.
It is a very impressive cast of people all kind of willing to go high camp. And I don't think that a lot of people really nail it, but one of the actors that I think really gets the subject material and knows exactly how to play it up is Brittany Murphy. She really just hits a perfect stride where she knows exactly where to take her character, how to deliver her lines, because a lot of the lines are pretty insufferable. So it takes a really good actor to look at bad dialogue and just know exactly how to deliver it in the right way.
Wish you'd dropped by earlier, Jackie boy. Then you could have met my boyfriend. Could have seen what a real man looks like.
There you go. After my nuts again. But I forgive you.
It's borderline in terms of how gross it can be, in terms of how sexual it can be, in terms of how empowering sometimes it could be. But this is not a movie that you think about too hard. This is a movie where you just kind of soak up these black and white striking images. This is a movie that channels the film noir fan in you. Like, imagine if Maltese Falcon was an afternoon cartoon. What would that look like? And there's Sin City. There's something in that for us.
Well, people were up in arms about the ultra-violence of Sin City. The movie they really should have been paying attention to, which is about the minutia of everyday violence, is A History of Violence.
This is the first time that David Cronenberg had paired with Viggo Mortensen, and it really solidified a relationship that would become very important to Cronenberg's filmmaking thereafter. Viggo Mortensen is fantastic in this film as a man who is hiding his past and hiding his true identity.
This was the story of a man who lives quite contentedly in a small town, runs a cafe, has 2 kids, a wife who loves him, but has a very, very dark past, which over the course of the film comes back to haunt him. If you wanted to describe a plot for classic film noir, that's basically it, which is someone who can't escape from their past. The present is always ruined by things done in the past, and those things in the past will always catch up with you.
The first big action sequence of A History of Violence takes place very early in the film. 2 men walk in, clearly looking for trouble.
Coffee? Black. Same. I'll have some pie. Some of that lemon meringue pie.
Guys, I'm sorry, we're close.
I said, coffee!
And in a flash, Viggo Mortensen very swiftly kills them. What's so great about this scene is that it really establishes doubt. Was that fate or was that talent that led him to be able to carry out what he did?
When the violence comes out, I think it's such an interesting tonal shift that occurs in the film. And it's one of the things that's so compelling about the movie. It's as sincere about the light as it is about the dark, and it sells it so thoroughly in both cases. That friction, I think it speaks to the duality in all of us, and I think that that's one of the most powerful things that this film has to offer.
2005 was a big year for gay rights in Canada. It was the first year where Canada recognized gay marriage. And you saw that shift in thinking, the expansion of gay rights in the films of 2005 as well.
When Brokeback came out, I was a little hesitant to watch it. I think the buzz surrounding it was something of a turnoff for me. But then I finally did, after all that hype, sat down and watched it, and it became one of the most moving love stories I ever watched.
It truly rocked me to my core. I remember that screening so well because it was sold out. I remember people gasping when Alma, that's Michelle Williams' character, first sees Jack and Innes kissing. And then I also remember hearing lots of other people cry. I sobbed, not only in the theater, the whole ride home to North York. I was sobbing. The tragic romance of it all really, really got to me. It's a movie about small moments that have bigger meanings.
Defining their sexuality, defining what they are to each other is difficult and fluid and changes over time, because it is very much about a relationship over time. It's about the relationships that they forge separate from each other as well, the family lives that they begin, especially in the case of Ledger's character, who styles himself very much as a family man and a husband and a father. And his desire for his fellow ranch hand doesn't contradict those things. It doesn't cancel them out. It's not about someone who's living a lie. I think it's more a movie about someone who's living two truths.
It was important that a film like Brokeback Mountain could cast two big deal hunks in these roles. And I think that that was something that Ang Lee really wanted. And it did open a lot of doors. It wasn't perfect, but it was very important.
We never really had any expectations to how the movie was going to be received. Certainly not while shooting, and then once we finished, I feel like we just dropped it and we didn't think about it much until it was released. And so it's been a real pleasant surprise, the way it's reached out and the way it's been received.
While Brokeback Mountain was nominated for a large number of Academy Awards that year, it really won only for Best Director and Ang Lee. It didn't win for Heath Ledger's performance, and it didn't win for Best Picture. And Lee really thought that that was an act of homophobia on the part of the Academy voters.
Everyone was expecting Brokeback Mountain to win, and you saw Jack Nicholson's face when he opened the envelope, and his voice almost broke when he said the words crash. And then he looked to the side of the stage and went, whoa, like, you know, he was just like, it took him aback. Crash was a movie that just made white people feel good about not being as racist as the characters in the movie, not being Matt Dillon's character, not being those creeps. And then Hollywood rewarded that because it made them feel good about themselves. You know, they gave Crash Best Picture. Could it be because they were not ready for Brokeback Mountain? Maybe. But again, its influence was so seismic, right? Like, it really did open the door for more mainstream narratives about homosexual characters. And so I wonder, if Brokeback Mountain didn't happen, would we have gotten to the point where Moonlight could win Best Picture?
In the mid-2000s and 2005, some of the most visually interesting films were coming out of Quebec. And one of the most exciting films was definitely Jean-Marc Vallée's Crazy. Crazy tells the story of Zach, this member of a massive Quebecois Catholic family who struggles with his own sexuality and especially seeming feminine in the eyes of his father, who he once idolized. It's this story of coming to terms with your homosexuality, but also Catholicism and family, and it's just everything all at once. And it's a wonderful depiction of 60s, 70s, and 80s Quebec.
This is the film that launches Jean-Marc Vallée. It creates this image of him as this kind of exciting, resourceful, exuberant storyteller, a lot of personality, a lot of daring, and allows him to transition into the kinds of movies that, you know, now he's seen as a major North American filmmaker for, movies like Wild and Dallas Buyers Club and The Show, Big Little Lies. But it's in Crazy that Canadian critics and Canadian viewers got a peek at this kind of talent, and the movie just kind of elevated him.
It was one of the first mainstream Quebecois films to talk about LGBTQ issues. There had been Quebecois films before that had tackled this. For example, there was Léa Poule. She was making a lot of films that looked at lesbian relationships. There was, of course, The Decline of the American Empire, which had a gay character that Denis Arcand used to talk about the HIV crisis in Quebec. But this was the first time a mainstream Quebecois film was tackling queer issues, and it was cool. It had, you know, Michel Côté, who was a household name in Quebec at the time. This wasn't, you know, queer issues on the margins. This was in every living room in Quebec, and it really helped change the conversation around queer rights in the province.
There was a wide variety of Canadian film in 2005, but two major directors really stood out with these epic period pieces. Adam Agoyan turned to kind of mysteries and thrillers and Where the Truth Lies, and Deepa Mehta got to finally finish her Elements trilogy with Water.
Water is about two sort of social issues that were occurring in India in the 1930s where the film takes place. One was the notion of child brides, and the other was of widows.
The opening scene of Water is incredibly heartbreaking. We start with a very young girl. She's 8 years old. Her name is Chuya. She's told, your husband is dead. You have to go to an ashram. You have to go to a widow's home. But it's the moment when she realizes that her father is going to leave her at this widow's home.
John?
पापा पापा हमको छोड़ो, हमें
Deepa Mehta totally sucker punches you in this scene. It's a loss of innocence, it's a complete tragedy, and it really sets the tone for the rest of Water.
This film is a comment on a section of Indian society that, banishes women who no longer can provide for the men in their life. And when Deepa was setting out to make this film, there was a group of right-wing male extremists who were trying to, invade the set, stop production.
The film Fire had enraged conservative and extremist Hindus, so much so that when she set up shop to film in Varanasi, India, along the Ganges, extremist Hindus destroyed the set, lit it on fire, and threw the remnants in the river, and she had to stop production. Several effigies of her were burned, as well as there were threats of suicide bombings. This production history was so newsworthy that George Lucas, in support of Deepa Mehta, actually took out a full-page ad in Variety, trying to solicit more support for Deepa Mehta to make her film.
If you think about Deepa Mehta, you have a Canadian woman from India. Her perspectives are much more modern, they're much more feminist, they're much more critical of India, which you don't see in Indian cinema, celebrating Indian culture but also being critical of it. And it's the kind of story that could only be told from an Indian woman living in Canada.
And I'm very proud to be a Canadian because Canada really embraces the fact of a multicultural concept. So I can be very Indian and yet be Canadian.
2005 represented maybe the biggest commercial film by director Adam Egoyan with the thriller Where the Truth Lies.
Where the Truth Lies is 3 different perspectives on a murder. And I really think this is a great Adam Egoyan film because it's quite cerebral and obviously very sexy.
It's partially set in the 1950s, partially set in the 1970s. It's a film that kind of cuts in a non-linear way in between these 2 time periods.
One of the exciting things about Where the Truth Lies is, of course, the production design, beautiful period details in all these clubs and hotel rooms. And you see it in the clothes, you see it in the apartments. It's really sumptuous and fun.
The moment you start thinking period, you have to be able to work at a certain level, and it has to feel real. And it means actually having a lot of fun as well. It's a really thickly brewed kind of neo-noir. The plotting is just so intricate, and above all, there was this notion of like narratives, like who tells the story? How is that story told? How is it withheld?
It's a great showcase for actress Alison Lohman as this writer trying to really uncover the truth. A classic Egoyan character really picking through different stories, trying to find what reality is.
Obviously, I lied about who I was. I'm sorry. It was a huge untruth. It wasn't planned. I was just freaked out about suddenly being on the plane with you and...
And how did you manage to get the seat behind me on the plane?
It was pure coincidence.
Bullshit!
It's true.
Where the Truth Lies had a very difficult time with distribution, despite having a very warm opening at the Cannes Film Festival. It was allocated an NC-17 rating in the States, which for this kind of film is very high.
The NC-17 rating was really harmful in terms of the commercial release of the film. We're not actually showing anything hardcore, but the problem is, weirdly enough, thrusting. So if you have enough body thrust in the sexual act, then you tip past a certain point. Like, I forget what the number was. Like, you could have a maximum of 3 thrusts in a shot. It's absurd, right? I don't even know if they still have that same rule, but that was the rule at the time. And there was a very well-known documentary by Kirby Dick, and he followed us through this process. We went to the offices in Los Angeles, we presented our case. It was all Byzantine and kind of a movie unto itself, obviously, because this documentary was made.
If I had to pick one really huge breakthrough performance from 2005, it is hands down Amy Adams in Junebug. Her character is really the heart of the film, and I think what this film really gets right is that small town family dynamic.
Junebug is this very unusual story about a Chicago art dealer and her new husband who take the opportunity to visit a strange outsider artist in North Carolina while also going home to meet his family for the first time. They had this whirlwind romance, and it's kind of an awkward situation.
Amy Adams sparkles in this film. What she does with this very small part fills the script and the film with joy and optimism, but the character's also incredibly wise. And she was the one person that stuck with most viewers, and certainly me, after watching the film. And that's why, her career exploded right after that.
She auditioned with the very famous monologue that appears in the film, the Meerkats monologue, where you can tell her character is incredibly nervous, meeting this very sophisticated woman who is now her sister-in-law.
I was born right here, lived here my whole life. My favorite animal is the meerkat. Do you know what they are? They're so cute. Oh, I've got this little charm bracelet with meerkats on it. Do you have lots of boyfriends? I bet you did. Did you ever try out for cheerleading or anything? I tried out, but I didn't make it.
What works so well about Junebug is it's not a movie mocking either side of these characters. It's a film that's just showing a conflict of values, whether it's valuing how you communicate or what you value in life. And in that way, it's a very warm film. It's also kind of a heartbreaking film because it's just about how there's these gaps in communication that may never be bridged between groups of people.
Squid and the Whale is a very personal film. It was based on writer-director Noah Baumbach's own experience going through his parents' divorce. It's very, very sincere and as uncomfortable as it should be.
We meet this family at the end of their marriage, and they live in Brooklyn. They're this very, educated couple, and their kids end up dealing with this breakup in a very different way. We meet Jesse Eisenberg in this film, and he gives a really interesting, compelling performance as someone who's really figuring out who his parents are as adults and individuals outside of just being a mom and a dad.
Eisenberg admits that when he was playing the role, he was really trying to be a lot like Noah Baumbach, including that really halting dialogue style. And that's interestingly something he would carry on to a lot of his other roles. He's so good at playing somebody who is kind of a creep, but you're still endeared to him. There's a softness to him. So he's able to do these really dark and cruel things, but you still like him as a character and identify with him.
I think my favorite scenes in the film are the tennis scenes that recur, and the doubles tennis played between the two parents and the two kids, and the dynamic of the Jeff Daniels character with the Jesse Eisenberg character and the Laura Linney with the youngest son is basically the dynamic for the rest of the film.
If you can, try and hit it at your mother's backhand. It's pretty weak.
Got it. Yes.
Don't gloat, Walt.
5 games to 3 us.
I was supposed to see a different movie at TIFF, and the one I went to see was canceled. The print didn't show up, so I just went into another room. It's like, oh, 10:30, Squid and the Whale, I'll go see that. What I didn't know is that Noah Baumbach had made a movie about my parents' divorce, and so I just got pulverized by it. Way too personal, way too close to home, just devastating. And now I understand that every 10 years, Noah Baumbach is going to make a movie that just ruins me. Last one was Marriage Story, so it's fine. I just accept that, and I go in, and he'll hurt me, and we'll be done with it.
Hustle and Flow is a movie that weirdly got made with a lot of hustle. Producer Stephanie Elaine believed in the project so much she actually sold her house in order to help get it financed. She's the one who was both partially responsible for John Singleton's incredible career, but also for bringing him on board as a producer here. He was the one who managed to find the $3 million in order to finance this film. And really, what you ended up getting was this movie that was in this huge bidding war, one of the biggest ones Sundance had ever seen. Because when people saw this story of a low-life pimp from Memphis who just wanted to escape using music, they really grabbed onto it as being quite possibly the next big thing. And it did make a huge impact.
There's so many people out there that's been struggling
and been left behind by society and life and left with nothing to sell but their dignity. And I got a chance to play somebody and bring these people to life and show that they do have a dream and that they do need consideration and encouragement.
When you think of Hustle and Flow, you think about that one scene where they start making the music, right? Where it all starts coming alive. You got the dude on the boards, putting a beat together, experimenting, the sounds come together. You know, it's 2005, and we didn't really have too many movies that had such a soulful, detailed, celebratory song-making session in that way for hip-hop, in the way that you had it for like the Doors and the Commitments and stuff. Hustle and Flow was the first to really kind of give us just a really well-made beat-making session. But I think the problems of that scene kind of speaks to the whole movie. I mean, this is a movie that is making exploitation palatable, right? It's like the most misogynistic trap song somehow becomes this point of celebration.
One of the challenges I think there is looking at this film with a modern point of view is it can be perceived as incredibly misogynistic in that these women are sacrificing themselves for him and his dreams and his career, and you never actually get to see any of their ambitions or their side of the story. They never actually become fully rounded people. You're just seeing him and his growth.
By 2005, we'd seen rap as a topic in film quite a few times, but it's one of the early instances where you're seeing Southern rap. Hustle and Flow has a role for Ludacris. He's kind of the film's villain.
As an independent work, if everybody knew what it took for them to, get where they're at today, from, putting their own money into it, it cost them less than $3 million, selling for $9 million, and now you never know how much money it's about to make. That's what's profound about it, and it's as gritty and grimy as it can get. Straight, no chase, and no sugarcoat.
The beauty of Hustle and Flow is how it makes it palatable, is this the sort of humanity it gives to these characters. It gives them the room to have some moral complexity.
Obviously, throughout the start of the decade, the impact of the attacks on 9/11 loomed very large in cinema. But at the same time, it was either too soon or things were still unclear, so you didn't get a lot of movies on 9/11. But kind of the most interesting 2005 movies dealing with 9/11 in a sort of oblique way came from an unusual source, and that was usually a political director, Steven Spielberg. And he made two movies that seemed to tackle 9/11 head-on, War of the Worlds and Munich.
They're both movies about conflict. In War of the Worlds, the conflict is alien versus human, and it's steeped in sci-fi lore and based on H.G. Wells. And Munich, the conflict is human and human, the cyclical, endless conflict between Jews and Palestinians, particularly this war of reprisal for the violence at the 1972 Munich Olympics and these kind of extrajudicial killings carried out by members of the Israeli secret task force, by the Mossad. And I mean, on the one hand, the themes of the movie are kind of heavy-handed and obvious. It's that idea of, an eye for an eye makes the entire world blind. But it's also really rooted in things that I think Spielberg does well, which is like the desire of children, even grown-ups who were children, for home and for family and for stability. And Eric Bana's character is constantly shown yearning for the wife and child who he's leaving behind while he's out on these assignments. And it's not just the idea that he's doing this for his family or that he's doing this for his kid. It's that in doing this, he actually starts to feel quite alienated and detached from the idea that he deserves this family because he just keeps taking life.
For Spielberg, there's a big investment in that idea of, can we ever repair what's been done? Can we change what's happened, or are these things just inevitable? And the way that people will justify things for themselves and the way that people will really push themselves to places that they're not comfortable with because they have bought into an ideology that they want to be true.
It doesn't try to answer questions. It just keeps asking the questions. And when you start with a question, you end up with more. And the way that film ends, you know that this is a statement about New York 9/11 and the peak of terrorism, or the way we are viewing terrorism at that time in 2005.
This was a moment in the mid-2000s under Bush where the exact political valence of American movie making was a big thing. Like, what side is this movie on? What side is it attacking? But I think that it's a work of real complexity. It's a movie that definitely warrants another look.
Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds was one of those examples of Steven Spielberg making a blockbuster, but also being serious. Because for a long time in the 90s, Spielberg was, he's doing Jurassic Park, he's doing these big entertainment vehicles. And War of the Worlds, while it is an adaptation of the original novel that everybody knows, the Orson Welles radio play, you also have this movie that is reflecting the post-9/11 world.
There was really a brief taboo on disaster movies and these kind of just mass killings in film between 2001 and this film. This film really opened the door. And when you think about movies like The Avengers, really most superhero movies these days, this kind of mass scale destruction, this kind of real tragedy at the heart of an action movie is absolutely regular. So Spielberg really innovated that, maybe for better, maybe for worse, but War of the Worlds is very much somebody deep in Hollywood saying, we are now okay with trying to process this.
Steven Spielberg really captures that post-9/11 fear, where we're afraid of the unknown, we're afraid of something coming to get us, and I think it really shows well here, because this is a sci-fi survival film. It's also a war film. What really stands out to me in this film is the sound design, that booming siren of the aliens. The lack of scoring in some parts of the film. It really enhances that terror and that boots on the ground horror of being in a real war situation.
Whenever Spielberg approaches dark material, he struggles, because I just think he's an idealist, he's an optimist, he's a romantic. But something draws him to these films, going back as far as actually Close Encounters of the Third Kind, even Jaws, which are films that have a strong sense of anxiety, a strong sense of paranoia. Those are not themes that come naturally to someone like Steven Spielberg, but they have resulted in some of his best work, and I think War of the Worlds, although it's not widely appreciated as such, is one of Steven Spielberg's best movies.